I'm Don.
And hi, I'm Cindy. Welcome to Pearls of Liberty, January 21st, 2012. And the big news today is the South Carolina primaries and Ron Paul coming in second. And I know Don's excited about that, so I'll let him tell you more about it.
Well, that's just exit polls, so nothing is official yet, but it is looking good. And interestingly, it's not Romney in the lead so far. It's Mr. Scumbag himself, Newt Gingrich. And boy, he really pulled a fast one on those South Carolinas.
Yeah, the South Carolina is a big Bible Belt state, and even some Christian newsletters that emails that Don and I receive have been encouraging Christians to get behind Newt Gingrich. And it's a bit shocking and stunning, but Christians are all about forgiveness, so he just says, oh, I repented, I'm not like that anymore, and here's why I did what I did, and you have to forgive me, and bada bing, bada boom. And
This is the way the psychopaths rumble.
Yeah, it is. It is. And so if you're a Christian, think about this, please. I mean, would you, if Newt Gingrich was dressed up like Santa Claus, would you let your child sit in his lap? And if the answer is no, or even if you have to think about it a little bit, might not be the best choice for president.
Look at the guy's eyes, for goodness sakes. That he's not a good man. And this is the man that did all he could behind the scenes to destroy the Reagan Revolution in the 90s, leading the contract with America and appearing to be the good guy, but secretly working behind the scenes to destroy America, championing NAFTA and GATT that were taking the American jobs overseas and always putting a good face on it. But we can see the fruits now, so there should be no being surprised by this guy. He is a globalist, totally sold out to the New World Order.
It's regarding Christians and the whole right-wing Christian right. The passion has always been for to get rid of abortion, legalized abortion. And I share that passion. But these guys promised that. George Bush, both of the George Bush promised that they would appoint guys to the Supreme Court, and they dangle this carrot in front of us that we can get rid of legalized abortion. Never happens. They know this is a handle they can use to grab us and shake us, and some of these other moral issues. Whereas the true issue is liberty. Without liberty, we can't practice our faith.
That's right. And on the abortion issue, I think Ron Paul had an exchange. I know he had an exchange. I watched it between Rick Santorum about abortion. And Ron Paul made an excellent point. He said, abortion is violence. All violent acts, he says it's an act of violence, all violent acts are handled at the state level. That is where abortion should be handled. And whenever we set up a centralized bureaucracy, that's just an invitation for all kinds of corruption and abuse. The founders envisioned a nation in which power was decentralized, and abortion is no exception. We should not expect the powers from on high to do this magical waving of the wand and it's going to be changed at the federal level across the country. It's not going to happen. It's been a scam from the beginning that it could happen that way.
And you know, there's this crazy irony about the whole abortion becoming legalized, citing that the Supreme Court cited a right to privacy that's implied in the Constitution. So for legalized abortion, we have this implied right to privacy, but we don't have a right to privacy of how many guns we own. We don't have a right to privacy of whether or not we go on a plane with bottles of liquid in our carry-on. There are a lot of means by which the government has encroached upon that implied right to privacy. And I think that Ron Paul and Don are right. When we try to legislate federally, we don't have a leg to stand on, because the Constitution very, very, very strictly limits the powers of the federal government.
Right. One other factor I want to point out is that in which Christians could be drawn to Newt Gingrich or some other candidate other than Ron Paul is the whole thing about Israel, and how Christians have been just programmed to support whoever says that they support Israel. And that means all this foreign aid, all this militaristic backup. Israel, never look at whether they might be right or wrong, never mind all the abuses in Gaza, etc., because they're being bullied by these bad Arabs. Forget all the anti-Arab propaganda that Hollywood has subjected us to for decades, and just Israel can do no wrong. I'm sorry, that's not reality, and we need to face reality. And this mindset of you'll be okay as long as you support Israel is based on a deception. The Israel that is inhabiting that land now is not the Israel of the Bible. They're not even descendants of the Israel of the Bible. It's a purposely planned deception in order to siphon off the support of Christians to a people that want to utilize that. The leaders, I'm not talking about the people in the country, but the leadership of Israel is completely Rothschild, Zionist backed, New World Order all the way. I'd go so far as to say it's one of the counterfeit governing entities that's mentioned in the book of Revelation. I don't have time to get into it now, but Israel is not what Christians think it is.
Well, one verse is those who say they are Jews but are not, and I'd very long wondered about what the meaning of that might be. So, yeah, this is Zionist madness. Read what the Bible actually says about Israel. One of the scriptures that is foremost in my mind is pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. That doesn't say or imply, Israel, the Israel that was formed in 1948 is always right, or protect, defend it no matter what. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Pray that there will be peace and support causes of peace, not war. So another thing that we wanted to discuss this week is SOPA and the internet bill that will that has potential to block use severely based on copyright issues. And I think we wanted to just talk a little bit about copyright issues in general, didn't we?
Right, yeah, I do. But it's also SOPA and PIPA, which is the IP Improvement Act, and they're all about privacy, and they're all about enabling the government to be in charge of protecting copyrights. And this goes to the core about what a free society is about and what can be shared legally. So copyright laws are not always what you think they are. You would think that somebody would necessarily have the right to control anything that they are selling that is digitally, it's possible to copy digitally, and that's a pretty broad assumption that may not even be true. So I would say we always need to err on the side of liberty and freedom, and whether the software is working for you or whether you are working for the software. So I heard Richard Stallman this week, the person who pioneered the new public license, GNU public license for free software to make software free, and he has some very interesting ideas about copyright law that I think would be we'd be better off if we applied them. What happens when you really emphasize copyright law is you empower the corporations to be dominant over the individuals. When you empower the free software concept, you empower the individual, and the software works for the individual. So some serious things to think through there, but bottom line, both of those acts, especially SOPA, would enable the government to shut down without any due process websites that had comments posted to them that contained links to sites that had copyright material on them. So it's just basically a guilt by association, no fair trial, and you're guilty, the end of free press. So the real free press today is the internet, and this is an attempt to shut down the free press.
Another issue is the fact that some things that should be in the public domain, I think the law was anything that is older than 50 years goes into the public domain, comes out of copyright. And there's some great literature that should have come out of copyright, like Lord of the Rings, that was purchased by the company that made the movies, and all of a sudden now it's not in the public domain. And didn't you say that they want to take the King James Bible out of the public domain?
I think you heard it from something we were both listening to, but yeah. I think that there's attempts and excuses to do that because of in some particular way that you're formatting it or you're doing something different to it, and there's all these excuses. It really is just corporate abuse.
And there's potential to lose significant blocks of great classical literature. I mean, if somebody owns the copyright and it's inconvenient for people to know that information that is contained in the copyrighted material, they can stifle it. They can take it away forever and never to see the light of day again. And in theory, that could actually happen to the Bible. So we need to be very careful about accepting these kind of laws that limit the internet and the access to information. And my goodness, use the internet now while we still can. Use it to full advantage. Find ways to communicate effectively and get your message out there, because you may lose the opportunity if you don't use it.
I also wanted to mention the whole idea of electronic readers, and both Cindy and I have Nooks now, just got mine recently, and I really like it, but I wouldn't buy a new book on it, or probably not. I would say that I still want to rely on other copies. I wouldn't have something that I only had on that, because they can just at will, because it is wireless, delete stuff that they want to delete. There's stories of people deleting, of companies deleting copies of 1984, George Orwell's famous now out of copyright book, so about a police state. And the whole idea of having an electronic reader is, in some people's mind, a way to get us to go away from the hard copy books, so that those can go out of use, and the electronics media would take over. I heard Richard Stallman say that, who's the new license copyright guy, the free software guy, say that the reason it's called Kindle, the Amazon Kindle, is it's supposed to kindle the fire that is going to be the Fahrenheit 451, the book burning, the whole concept in the abstract, of course, that it's supposed to kindle this fire that's going to destroy the printed word. So something to think about. I'm not saying I completely believe that, but I would not trust completely to have printed material on the electronic devices.
I really just have things on mine that I got from Gutenberg.org. That was one of my main purposes in getting the Nook, that I could easily read a lot of free classics, and I prefer classics for the most part anyway. So that works well for me. But it is something to be considered. We also want to consider NESARA and share a little bit about NESARA. Don has done some research, and I know he has some things that he would like to share about that.
Well, I think that kind of fits within the next topic also, so I want to kind of put it in those terms. A lot of the information that's coming out through Benjamin Fulford about White Dragon Society in Asia and people that are taking on the power structure of the West, the Anglo-American banking empire and the royalty behind it, etc. A lot of that information is actually kind of built on something that happened in the previous decade, in the 90s, and I was not aware of those things at that time, so I did a little bit of digging because I had heard bits and pieces about NESARA and some of the activities around that, but I recently read a more comprehensive story about it, and NESARA stands for the National Economic Security and Restoration Act. And basically the plan of NESARA was recognizing that Americans had been swindled by the banking system way back in the 90s, and that there were actually legislation that was passed in secret that would give Americans a remedy for their corrupt and fallen banking system. What it does is it takes away the power from the private Federal Reserve. It nationalizes the Federal Reserve and puts it on a basis of having some backing to the money, gold or whatever it is, so that it's not pure fiat, and it restricts the way in which the bankers can control it, and it provides a remedy for all of the foreclosures of stuff that hadn't even really happened yet, but had begun to happen in the rural areas, and that was a lot of the impetus behind it. So I just wanted to point out that there is that whole background that did happen in the 90s secretly, and was blocked every time it was about to happen, about to be made public, about to have this banking system change before all this catastrophe in the last few years happened. There was supposed to be a change in the 90s. It didn't happen because it was blocked by the powers that be. The royalty, the Bush family, and other powerful forces, Henry Kissinger, the Rockefellers, those people, neocons in general in the Pentagon, and there were a lot of good people in the Pentagon that were known as the White Hats, and that's where the White Hats got their name, working within the power structure within the United States. So all that gave me a somewhat new perspective about what's happening now with some of the things that Benjamin Fulford is talking about, because in many ways we've been through this before, but now it's escalated to an international level, and I'll let Cindy talk more about that.
Gee, thanks. I know it is. This is of great interest to me, and I've followed this kind of raptly for the last few weeks, really since around Christmas time. Benjamin Fulford says that a consortium mostly made up of Asians has a plan to restructure the world financial system, and if you watch us every week, you've heard us talk about that before. And the Asians are demanding that there be a just system for the world, and they evidently have the power to enforce these changes. According to Benjamin Fulford, the Asians who are trying to make inroads to change, who happen to be called the White Dragons, they've been able to lock down the financial resources of some of these people, and without access to their finances, as Don said, a lot of these systems have already, these things are already set in motion, like the mainstream media, and some things won't change, but they will be limited in what they're able to do with their financial resources tied up. But according to Benjamin Fulford, the Asians will not interfere with the American political system. So they're restructuring the world economy. They'll get the banks on a leash, We may have some relief from the Fed, but they are not going to get involved in our political system, which means voter fraud, guys like Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich parading as great Christians who are going to save the U.S. That's not going to be taken off the table. We need to rise up ourselves and address these problems. And the reason the Asians don't want to address them is because they don't want to do what the United States has always done and rush into another sovereign nation and enforce their structure. They want to allow the change to come from within. So the change must come from within, and we need to all be on our guard and communicate clearly and help people wake up and move forward so that we can break free in this country from the political oppression that has held us as prisoners.
Yeah, and you wrote a blog this week that used a Lord of the Rings analogy to help us understand that scenario that could be coming very soon.
Yeah, if you've only seen the movies, you won't be aware of this. But if you've read the books, at the end of Return of the King, before Bilbo and Frodo go off with Gandalf and the other two who have the rings to the Netherlands or whatever the elf kingdom that's offshore. Before that happens, the hobbits, upon their return to the Shire, find that Saruman and Wormtongue have set up shop in the Shire. And I think Ted Sandyman's the sheriff or something, and it's just a mess. They have dug up fields, and they have overturned liberty structures, and as I said in my blog, they're spraying chemtrails, and not really, that didn't happen in The Lord of the Rings. But they went just for spite to destroy the Shire. And when the hobbits came back from their great adventure of throwing the ring in the cracks of doom and being honored by the king, Aragorn, and all the people, and lauded by Gandalf, they returned to the Shire, and they still had to man up and get rid of the evil within the Shire. So even if the Asians are able to rid the evil from the world economic structure, in our little Shire here, we still have a lot of evils. We still have Agenda 21 knocking at the door with ICLEI here in the Bay Area and ABAG, and wanting to impose all the green standards and the carbon taxes and the chemtrails and the manufactured weather, and the list goes on and on and on. We have to clean up the Shire. So might as well begin to face these issues now.
You just don't want to be a good little globalist and be a citizen of the world, do you?
You know, I guess it's inevitable that we are citizens of the world, but not the New World Order. Yeah, no.
Not a tyrannical system. In the whole idea of people being free means that you don't give away your power to some foreign entity. You need to assume responsibilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Live locally the way that you would want the world to be, but that doesn't mean you buy into control mechanisms that have been handed to you from on high.
Right. Yeah. So some of these laws, or if our government continues as it has been, we're going to have to reverse some of these, the NDAA and some of them. I mean, there's just this mountain of work to be done, but we've been lazy too long, and it's like when you go on vacation, we're going to have to work extra hard to make up for the time that we were slack. So we watched some interesting films this week, and I don't actually have this at the top of the list, but I think the first one that we should talk about is the Kennedys, just because it was so grand and so sweeping.
Yeah, that was good. We'd heard about it when it came out a year or so ago, and the only thing I read briefly was that it seemed to make a lot of about his sexual escapades, Jack Kennedy's. The surprise, and that's there, but it's not as major as and as scandalous as I thought it'd be. It didn't take the easy way out. It dealt with them as a human being. The surprise about the Kennedys for me was how important Robert's role was, and being his brother's campaign manager, and with his brother there in the White House, and he made a lot of enemies, taking strong stands that really enabled his brother Jack to function in his presidency, to be who he was without having to fight the battles that Robert was fighting behind the scenes. But Robert made those enemies, and that ended up being some of the force behind the people that wanted him dead and ended up assassinating him. So you had this incredible scene of Robert Kennedy there with his father, who had now couldn't speak and had a stroke after Jack had been assassinated, and Bobby is there just weeping and saying that he thought that all they had to do was be on the side of the angels and the side of right, and everything would be okay, and how wrong he was. And he didn't realize how serious the battles were that they were fighting. And it's really moving and very, very powerful, and it's well worth watching. That's just one highlight of the whole thing. It's just many, many very powerful moments in that film series.
Another film that we watched this week is The Wind That Shakes the Barley, and it's kind of an IRA film. Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, it takes place in the 1920s when Ireland was fighting guerrilla warfare for their independence, and the British come in and do things that were very abusive to the people. And you had two brothers, one that had a career in front of him and wanted to have an opportunity. He had an opportunity to be in London and to become a physician, I think it was. And he saw that the plight of his people, and he saw that he had to fight. And then his brother was a natural fighter, and there they are fighting this guerrilla warfare in the cities, and having to do terrible things just because they felt they needed to fight for their people and not have them be abused in the way that they were. So I won't say too much about it to give it away, but I think it's very well worth watching. It's very well acted and written, and it gives you kind of another view of the struggle between the Irish people and the English. It's sad, but it's powerful.
And as you said, this was how many years after Braveheart, and the same struggle was still going on. And it's ironic that we think that these issues have been addressed. We think that in the American Revolution, things changed and Britain relinquished control, but many of the same families are still in control today. Mm-hmm. The modern world is not as modern as we would like to think that it is. We are still very much in a struggle for our freedom.
Yeah, it's very much like the enemy just goes into hiding when he knows that he's been exposed, and that's what's really happened in many ways over the last century or two, or the last couple decades. The enemy just gets more subtle. Now, however, he's coming back out into the open again, and we're seeing tyranny. If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you see the tyrannical world government unfolding, because it can't be cloaked forever. But it's the same forces that have been the driving engine of tyranny throughout history are coming to the forefront again. So it really helps to get a historical perspective where you see these things and you see some kind of the trade-offs and that people have to make in their lives in order to fight for liberty and fight for freedom. There's one point in the end of that movie, the Wind That Shakes the Barley, where the people, where their leaders make a deal that they don't think that should be made. In other words, a truce that some of the people think sells them out. So what do? They keep on fighting, and some of them did. And I asked myself what I would do in that situation. I realized that the propaganda battle had been lost. In other words, the people wanted peace so badly that they didn't think that true sovereignty was possible, so they said okay, and they took the deal. But that doesn't need to be the end of the story. The pen is mightier than the sword, and education and principles of liberty can continue on as long as you have the freedom to write about what liberty really is. And that's where we're at now in many ways. Not that we've come through a battle, but that we need to help people understand how important liberty is and worth fighting for, not necessarily physically, but never to give into it, so that we allow it to have control over the freedom that God has given us.
Another film we saw this week was called The Island, and interestingly enough, it's about the Russian Orthodox faith and a holy man, and it has subtitles. It is in Russian. But and it's a little introspective, but it is a beautiful film and very worth watching. Another film that we saw was The Widow of St. Pierre, and this film was also on an island that had a lot of snow and was very cold. This film was in French and had English subtitles, and it's about basically, it's just about a very small community and a prisoner who has made a very serious mistake, and there are some who want to extend grace to him and some who want to see him punished, mostly based on their ego, and it's a great human struggle.
These are French people, but it's actually in Newfoundland, so it's in French-speaking Canada in about 1850, I think it is. And the whole community that this prisoner was exiled to actually comes to like him, and he has a change of heart and basically repents without having a public demonstrative display of repentance. He becomes a person that's beloved of the community, and they don't want to have to kill him. So they're waiting for the guillotine to come. And in the meantime, he has relationships with people, fathers a child, etc. So it's very interesting to see how it ends. It does show you the sacrifice that people make in their lives in order to do what's right. And it's a powerful film.
And another film that we saw that wasn't really all that powerful, but was fun to watch, was Hopscotch. It's an older Walter Matthau film about a guy who was in the CIA, and it's more of a drama than a comedy, but it's really not a serious film. It doesn't show any true deep CIA scandal.
No, yeah, it's basically interesting because I think what it was in the 70s or something that it was, or was it 80s?
It was 1980, just
1980.
Yeah.
So you see some of the understanding of what the CIA was at that time, and Walter Matthau is a very likable person, so you see him in this likable CIA role, and he's smarter than the people that are trying to show him up that are younger and that kind of thing, and it's funny, and he tricks the people, and it's kind of a pro-CIA propaganda piece in the early 1980s is kind of how I saw it, but it's enjoyable. You might learn a thing or two from it, and that's basically it.
We also saw the film Bloodworth, which is about, you've heard the story before. It's about an old country guitar player and his family's exploits. So it was entertaining, I guess. I don't think I really watched it closely. Did you?
I didn't watch it that closely either, and it's a country singer going back to his roots, and after he's famous, and dealing with stuff in his hometown. The role is played by Val Kilmer, and has some other good acting in it. I don't know that there was anything particular about the film that made it all that powerful.
Do you have any parting thoughts?
Just grow in knowledge to fight the good fight with wisdom. Otherwise, you might find yourself fighting with the right heart but on the wrong side. Easy to do.